Hey, everybody. I wanted to spend a little bit of time here giving you a solid introduction to Frankenstein. This is normally what I would do in the classroom, so I transferred my introductory PowerPoints over to Google, and I'm going to try this screencast and see how it goes. So I hope you like it. So our novel, Frankenstein, is what we would classify as a gothic horror. It's not a dystopian novel, so thank goodness. I know you're probably pretty excited about that. So let's look at this first question, which is what sights and sounds do all horror movies have in common? Well, um, you might think of things like screams and sounds of terror and lots of blood, maybe darkness, thunder and lightning, really ominous kinds of things. So when you think about a horror movie, just your average horror movie, those are the types of things that you should think about. So when we talk about a gothic horror, you need to pay attention to some of those because they really set the mood for you. Okay. So what exactly is a gothic novel? It's an English genre of fiction that was popular in the 18th to early 19th centuries. So this novel fits the bill for sure. And it's characterized by an atmosphere of mystery and horror and having a pseudo-medieval setting. So pseudo-medieval is not a very common word. Pseudo, if you break it down, it means fake. And medieval, when you think about medieval time period, you think about castles, you think about torture chambers, you think about darkness, the dark ages, things like that. So even though it's not set in modern times, it definitely has that dark, ominous feel to it. It is really important to understand who the author is and what she's all about, especially for this novel, because much of what Mary Shelley experienced in her own life, you see it manifest in the novel itself. Okay, so I'm just going to read through what's on the screen and maybe add some notes just to help you understand. So she was the daughter of Mary Wollstonecraft, who was a feminist writer, and William Godwin, who was an author and a radical. And they were both radicals, so they were, going against the grain. And she was born in 1797. And it's important to note that her mother died 11 days after giving birth, which actually wasn't very uncommon back in this time period. Childbirth caused a lot of deaths. So, 1814, at the age of 16, Mary Shelley elopes with a poet named Percy Shelley. And interestingly enough, Percy Shelley was actually already married to a woman named Harriet. So, interesting, right? I'm going to make myself a little bit smaller here just so I make sure I don't trample on the next sets of slides. So here's a little bit more of her timeline. 1815, she gives premature birth to a daughter, and this daughter dies within days. So that was her second loss. Remember, her first loss was her own mother. And then a year later, she gives birth to a son named William, and their family moves to Geneva, Switzerland. And Geneva is a large part of the setting of the novel. So it's really important to understand why she uses Geneva. It was from her own experience. So this is the important part here. She engages in a friendly ghost story competition with Lord Byron. So this novel was born from that competition. So another story that was a strong influence was Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is up there on my bookshelf. It's one of my lists of things to read. I read it on an audiobook, but I actually want to read it. So make sure that you understand that she engages in this friendly ghost story. That's really important. In 1817, she gives birth to a daughter named Clara, and then she completes the novel Frankenstein. So she is 19 years old. So from that ghost story competition, she writes the novel Frankenstein, and she writes it and finishes it at the age of 19. So that hopefully will astonish you a little bit. It always impresses me. In 1818, so it was called Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus. So a Prometheus is a demigod, and this is published anonymously, and it's wildly successful. So as I'm sure you can imagine, the reason why it was published anonymously was because she was a woman. And so she would not have gotten the respect she deserved, especially a 19-year-old woman publishing a novel. In 1818 also, her daughter Clara dies, and then William dies. So more tragedy, keep piling it on. And it just gets worse. 1819, she gives birth to Percy Florence, which is the only child that survives infancy. And then 3 years later, she miscarries another child and nearly dies, and her husband drowns on a boat during a storm. So just fraught with tragedy. So a year later, Frankenstein is actually published bearing her name. And I can't do that quick of a math, but several years later, she again revises the novel for republication. I've actually seen a couple different versions out there. I've seen the earlier version, and there are subtle differences between that. And I think most of the time we're reading the revised version. 20 years later, she actually dies at the age of 53, and 60 years later, the first film adaptation of the novel is released. And then 20 years after that, Boris Karloff is in the movie version that most people will recognize as the movie for Frankenstein. Okay, so that's Mary Shelley's life. So, who is Frankenstein? Most people, when they hear Frankenstein, they think it's the creature or the monster. And those are the two interchangeable terms. I try to say creature, but sometimes I revert back to monster. So, actually, that's a misconception. Frankenstein is actually the doctor who created the creature. So, the novel is named after the doctor who created the creature. Here are some images. This one was a book cover here. These are shots from the movie versions. This is a drawing. I know you probably can't see that very clearly, but he is radically deformed. So I'm not sure if you can get in and see that. And this is the movie version as well. So let me go back, sorry. Here's some more images. And this is another depiction. If you see all the medieval machinery, that's the medieval reference. This is the movie over here. This was a spoof movie called Young Frankenstein, which is actually one of my favorite. It's a Mel Brooks movie. It's one of my favorite. It's satirical, and it kind of makes fun of what's happening in it. And then this over here, if you can see my screen moving around, the bottom left corner is it was a television show called The Munsters, and it was out in the 60s. It was a very popular TV show. Again, all of these are the creature. So this is why when people hear the term Frankenstein, they think creature, but it's not the creature that is the focus of the novel. It's very, very interesting. Okay, so how is the novel organized? It's a frame tale. So it starts with letters in the present, and they're written by a character named Robert Walton. He is writing to his sister. So when you read those letters, you need to understand that we are in Robert Walton's head, and he is writing letters to his sister, and he is on a boat. So you have to figure out who is Robert Walton, what's he doing, what's his purpose. Then chapter 1 begins with a flashback, and that is Victor Frankenstein. So he is the main narrator of this novel. Again, the person who the novel is named after. So it's Victor, and he narrates from chapters 1 through 10. And chapter 1 begins in his childhood. So you need to understand, it's like, way back when. So you're getting a picture of what it was like when he was young. And then there's a second flashback, which begins at chapter 11, and the narration now switches to the creature. Okay, so he switches to the creature, and so Victor and the creature are face to face in chapters 11 through 16, but the creature is telling Victor his version of how he sees things from when he was born. Okay. Then I should say chapter, not chapters. Chapter 17 is Victor and the creature talking back and forth. And I refer to this as a transition chapter, because then this transitions us into chapters 18 to 24, which is the rest of the novel. And we're back to Victor narrating again. So the creature leaves, and now we're back in Victor's head, in Victor's world. And then at the end of chapter 24 are some more letters that are set in the present. So again, the letters, if you go back to the beginning, remember the letters are being written by Robert Walton. So as you read, you need to start to try to figure out what is the connection between Walton and Victor. Okay. And that's all I have for my introduction to this novel. I'm going to include after this video, there's going to be a calendar for your reading. So the chapters that you should be covering week to week. It gives you the link to the website called Lit2Go, which has PDFs of every chapter plus audio, because just like it's a Victorian novel, so it's very wordy, it's very verbose. So what Shelley could say in 10 words, she chooses to say in 200. Okay, so you just kind of have to get used to it. It's very flowery, it's very detailed, and so it has a a schedule for you to keep. It also has the audio attached to it, so maybe that could help you with your reading a little bit. And I know many of you have probably ordered the book, so you'll want to annotate, which I highly encourage always, no matter what you're reading. And then at the bottom, it has a frame tail. It's a China box structure, which talks about this slide right here that's on the screen, talking about the frame tail. So it breaks down exactly who's talking in what chapters. I would say probably download that paper and keep it handy on your computer at all times so you can reference it. If you have printing capabilities, maybe you want to print that sheet and use that as your bookmark as you go, and you can take some notes on there as well. I hope you found this helpful. And gosh, I miss you, and enjoy the reading.